Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and Operation Overdrive is not a popular season of Power Rangers. Or rather, it is, by virtue of being ripped to shreds by the fanbase. But was the harsh reaction justified? Well, that's what we're here to discuss. So, let's start where we always do, at the beginning, with the two-part opener, Kick into Overdrive. So the story goes that Moltor and Flurious, who are brothers, got trapped by the Sentinel Knight for doing the whole evil villain thing and trying to steal the Corona Aurora, but Mr. Hartford frees them by uncovering that same artifact. Wait, what? I'm getting Megaforce flashbacks already, and not just because Gosei slept through this nonsense too. Why would anyone create a system where any old schmuck with a compass could free villains on other planets and then signal them to your exact location? What's going on here, Mr. Knight? Are you trying to send a message like, ha, the doohickey you both wanted is now your lock and key? Poetic, ain't it? Nobody would ever think to venture all the way down here and collect this crown. Oh, darn. Never accounted for that one. Welp, time to do the Zordon thing, except almost never help. Here's the starting issue. It's not about that mechanic per se, although the idea of getting shipped to another world for crown thieving seems pretty stupid. No, it's about leaving a very important artifact and all of its component parts in one place. Earth. Literally every single jewel is on Earth. Why? You're making it easy for the multiple jewel hunting factions because these aliens no longer have to comb through the entire universe, which would have been a great idea for the season, as I'll explain later. Then you have to go begging Mr. Hartford to go get the Ranger program up and running again. But why even do that? Sentinel Knight could have brought back proven Rangers who already defended the Earth, which he does later. He does know a thing or two about the legacy of power, so what's the point of Operation Overdrive initially? Now, don't get me wrong, Rose would be an excellent addition to any Ranger team, and Mac proves to have a good sense for leadership on several occasions. But before anyone was recruited, why was creating a completely new team from scratch the optimal route? A team that consistently screws up, religiously loses jewels, the whole crown, and important clues. A team that never develops much chemistry with each other and acts more flippant and childlike at times than actual teenagers. I get it. Nobody likes Dax, but Overdrive's opening issues have a lot more to do with Sentinel Knight being a woefully inconsistent and ill-conceived character in terms of actions and responses. The jewels in the crown are supposed to be his responsibility, but where is he from episode 3 until Once a Ranger? Oh, but I'm sure there's a simple explanation for that too. And if a team where only 2 or 3 Rangers are all that useful at any given time could find the jewels within 32 episodes, maybe rethink your hiding spots there, Mr. Knight. You fought Thrax, somehow. You know all about the grid, which means you almost certainly have planetary connections outside of just Earth. And that's not even close to scratching the surface. Sentinel Knight regains physical form after he makes the Rangers go sword hunting. So why didn't he tell Mr. Hartford to do that in the first place? Would have been a ton more useful than disappearing for more than half the show. And what's more, with the crown, he literally has the power to create life, as in things that weren't living, they're alive now. That's in addition to being able to restore the power coins, recover Tori's lost Ranger power, and somehow acquire a Ranger and a Morpher from a season that temporally doesn't exist yet. He is overpowered as all hell, and keeps all of that power to himself most of the time, just to watch a couple young adults flail around with history lessons. And for Rose, it was easy, which I'll remind you, it shouldn't be, because these jewels are supposedly a big deal. But did any thought go into hiding these damn things? No, probably not, but even less thought went into Sentinel Knight's absurd, randomized, and only brought up when plot-relevant power set that breaks so many things about this show's narrative. And when the hell did Rita and Zed get a son? Did I miss something, or did Countdown to Destruction suddenly never happen? Oh, and there it is again. Another feeling of deja vu. So much plot inconsistency to go along with writers that completely forgot the past happened. Which is really weird since this was supposed to be an anniversary season. And this is just from one single character who is only in the very beginning and the back third of the show. This is the guy who is tearing the season a new one because sense is apparently overrated. Speaking of senseless, enter the numerous villain factions. You thought Spider-Man 3 was bloated on that end? Overdrive kindly invites you to hold its beer. The problem is never the number of villains though, it's how they're utilized and how they function into the bigger picture. When we talked Lost Galaxy, we talked about how that season had a ton of antagonists, several of them all-time great ones. That worked because the villain side of that season essentially had its own story going on in the backdrop of Terraventure. It was a very good story, a very effective story, and it helped make Lost Galaxy, a season that already has some of the best Rangers, that much better on a character level. However, Operation Overdrive votes against making a competent villain story, and instead vies for a contrived nightmare about two brothers fighting each other like toddlers but also fighting the Rangers. Then Camdor and Miratrix are a thing for some reason. The Fearcats had potential, and tying them in a Taizon story was smart, but they would have worked a lot better as the main villains. And if you structured the story around the Fearcats being essentially the Psycho Rangers but without the color-based hangups, you've probably got something there. And if they were made crafty, smart, cunning, challenging the Rangers to not just be stronger, but to think differently and be ready for anything, this season is a great one, even with Dax and Will in it. But as is, there's so much congestion with faction after faction searching for these jewels that who the villains are never ends up mattering. I mean, hell, they could have brought back Lothor's nieces to look for the jewels for all the difference it would make. But, to Overdrive's credit, they did really the only smart thing you can do with a group of incongruous villains, which is team them all up for what amounts to a Sinister Seven. Unfortunately, Thrax is destroyed pretty easily, and all the villains go running off back into their own holes. Talk about wasted potential. This should have been the finale, and it would have for damn sure been superior to the one we got. The narrative should have built up to Thrax being endgame and not a 2-episode disappointment, because if he's gonna hold that staff, he can't be undone faster than Captain freaking Mutiny. If his bout with Sentinel Knight mattered, which it should given who his parents are, make it matter. Make him the guy that gets released in episode 1. Make him the core reason, not the subplot reason, that Sentinel Knight is motivated to win this fight. And then give every single Ranger on the team a reason to want to take him down before the final fight. The reason? Easy. Everybody by that point would know that Mac is an android, and after his identity crisis, he feels like it wouldn't cost too much to sacrifice himself for the cause. But it does, because despite Mac's feelings regarding his mechanical mortality, his team, his butler, and especially his father still very much care about him. But Mac decides to go through with it anyways to take out all of the Sinister Seven, save Thrax. That would be part 1. Then, in part 2, a newly motivated Mr. Hartford takes the reins of Red Ranger, as he originally planned, for one final battle for the sake of his fallen son against Thrax. And then, I guess Mac can still get brought back to life as a real boy. Happy ending for everyone. This season sort of toys around with the theme of what life really means, but they never really do much with it. I mean, I don't expect something akin to Ghost in the Shell, but there was definitely a lot more there than they gave us. Instead, they spent a lot more time on the treasure hunting side of things, which is fine. When that aspect of the story took hold after their trip to Atlantis, it became really engaging, in spite of my points against it. It created a very rare and very welcome serialized approach to Ranger episodes, with each one building off the other en route to the next clue or the next jewel. It made actually finding a jewel a real accomplishment that took a wide assortment of skills and clues. I still think it's strange to assemble a brand new team for that job, given Sentinel Knight's godlike powers of Ranger restoration, but given most of the skills the team brings, it certainly makes sense why they were chosen. But then they kept throwing new villains into the mix, the characters never become all that well developed, then once a Ranger happens, and pretty soon after, the season just ends. Not with a bang, but with a cold whimper. There was a lot happening in this season that shows a little bit of ingenuity and creativity on the side of the production team. But it only gets worse with time as the ideas they throw around become a jumbled, tangled mess with no cohesive narrative throughline to latch onto. Now let's briefly get into the characters. Mac is a really good Ranger, and his reveal was a genuinely good twist, but there's really not much to it other than the expected "you're not my real father" bits. Rose is a really good character, but the most interesting thing she did was learn to have fun. Will is a nothing character, who only ever embraces the overused and extremely tired trope of "I work alone." He tries to be the star of the team early on, but that makes no sense as a character trajectory. Sure, the lone wolf stuff technically does, but he's a professional thief, meaning he should be very good at simply getting the job done without much fuss. That's what he was brought in to do, so why does he all of a sudden need the spotlight? Especially since in his line of work, the spotlight tends to mean jail time. That should have been a Dax trait. You know, the one character here that legitimately wants to be a star. Why not have him be the one to question the shot calling, then try and probably fail to lead the team? Or just, do anything with his character that isn't some awkward bumbling around. If he wants to be seen, be heard, make his presence known, then let him do that. Unfortunately, when they did let him do that, he looked flaky and irresponsible and all around worse as a character as a direct result. Ronnie has a few good moments and 2 good focus episodes. There's not an overabundance of depth to her character either, but she does show some layers. And Tyzon is no more or less interesting than Orion, so not really too much to say about him. What you watched is what you got. The characters across the board had potential, as most characters do, but the series did not know what to do with it. And it's easy to see how each and every one of them could have been challenged to grow a lot more than most of them actually did. And outside of the Hartford men and Spencer, the character dynamics are almost non-existent, save Ronnie and Will a little bit, and that's just barely memorable enough to mention. I know several of you were clamoring for me to verbally eviscerate this season for some 20 odd minutes like I did with Megaforce, but honestly, there's not a ton to say. Too many ideas in a cramped space, too little character growth, too little attention to detail, too many question marks surrounding this aberration of a character, and not a single noteworthy villain. Only an interesting set of villains that lack the necessary screen time or focus to be effective. That having been said, the original ideas and twists were almost all good, if not a bit inconsistent in terms of execution and severely lacking on the anniversary side of things. The Fear Cats in limited time still proved to be far more dynamic as villains than someone like Xantrid or Divatox could ever hope to be, and the team, while mostly underdeveloped, gave us 3 Rangers worth at least an honorable mention for their respective colors. Even in the stacked field that is Red Rangers, I would still give Mac the edge over Rocky or even Shane to a slight degree. What Overdrive isn't that complicated. The production team got way too excited about the 15th anniversary and threw a bunch of ideas together, several of them very good ideas that alone could have carried a whole season. But within 10 episodes, what looked like at least an interesting finished product started tearing apart at the seams, held together only with the thinnest veil of Scotch tape. It had some good ideas, it had some good characters, and it had a unique style and energy that almost made the entire venture worth it. But too many times over, this season wastes away its potential, works against itself, and sloppily tried to resolve all of its multiple plot points before one of the most forgettable finales ever constructed. So limp and void of passion that even Samurai's was better. And there was a plethora of more interesting and more creative ways to celebrate the legacy of power than one 2-part event, the logic of which only makes the season more dubious in design. But to be fair, there was a subtle Mystic Force reference in there, and that was cool. But what if this season actually acted like a legacy season, gave itself a legitimate reason to pepper in some controlled fan service here and there? What would that look like? Here's more of my ideas, just for the fun of it. Make it so that the Sentinel Knight hides the jewels not all over Earth, but all over space. The whole season is composed of otherworldly villains, so if the jewels are so coveted beyond Earth, it makes sense that the jewels would also be otherworldly. Atlantis, Norse gods, pirates? Interesting angles to take, I guess, but they're ideas that have nothing to do with Power Rangers, for the most part. So what are they doing in an anniversary season? Instead, make it so that the underwater city you find is actually the underwater planet. And guess who they run into there? Exactly. Because, as some of you may remember, Billy moved to Aquitar after finding himself a lady friend there. But he won't just be empty fan service. He was the brains of his group, just like Rose is now. So the best thing to do is construct a narrative where Rose learns from a veteran ranger who knows her perspective all too well. And you can do this 5 times. You can put a jewel on KO35, put one on Mercuria to tie in Tyzon's involvement a little better, and you pretty much have to use Miranoi at some point. It writes itself. And because you'd be traveling through space, the idea of multiple villain factions is more plausible. Plus, it's space. Power Rangers as a franchise has never ever gotten space wrong. And hopefully they continue that trend because Q Ranger begs to be adapted. And then put the last jewel in the last place in the universe anyone wants to be, the M51 Galaxy. Why? Because it's where evil reigns supreme and the bad guys always win. It's literally the perfect locale for anything climactic, and it would make sense for Thrax, who is the grandson of Master Vile who ruled said galaxy, to reside there in anticipation for the final battle I propose. But fun little thought exercise aside, when it's all said and done, I still kind of like this season, flaws and all. And I would gladly take Overdrive all over again if it meant avoiding live-action Sword Art Online or this cesspool of incompetence that not even the production team cared about. That's not saying much, but here's the difference between this anniversary season and the next one. Operation Overdrive is an outright mess, and probably represents the lowest point of the Disney era. But, that said, there was passion here. There were people who cared here. There were ideas and concepts and narratives flying at you too fast to process, but to even have that, multiple somebodies needed to be awake, needed to give a damn. Overdrive's only real problem is execution of its ideas, not the ideas themselves most of the time. But Megaforce? That whole goose was cooked on arrival. They never even gave that dumpster fire a chance to be interesting, or even slightly engaging, and then they tack super on the name, and all the issues become even more clear as they throw in the towel and say, hey, remember when we were worth watching? A season where things should have been done a little bit better versus a season that did nothing at all? I'll skip the latter every single time. All in all, Overdrive is no masterpiece, obviously, but I still think it might be better than you think. For one thing, its crimes don't even come close to what the Neo Saban era did in its first couple of years, and for another thing, there's plenty of stuff to like here. And looking beyond all the nonsense involved with Sentinel Knight, it's hard to get too worked up about the issues here. There are no shortage of issues, of course, but nothing so overwhelmingly damning that would leave me wishing the season never existed. Although, honestly, I would live a happier life if that theme song didn't exist. I wouldn't go so far as to recommend this season, but it might just be worth another look, at least to really think more deeply about the problem areas, and if they're really all that problematic. This season was a frustrating one to sit through at times, but I never really got too angry at it, or wanted to quit on it, because, for better or worse, this season never quit on itself. That might not make it great, or even all that good, but it sure as hell made it more bearable than yet another standalone moment from Swordsman Jesus. And I'd even go so far as to call it on par with Turbo. But that's about as high as I'll go, especially since Turbo actually improved as it progressed, but for another time. Probably a much later time though, since I know that a lot of you have been wanting that SBD video since forever ago. That'll probably end up being a dense one, so bear with me on the time it's taking. But until then, thanks for watching.